So today we're talking about a super important concept, because if you don't do this one thing, you can be leaving on the table tons of performance gains, tons of adaptations, tons of progress that you're making in your training. And quite frankly, it's going to be hard for you to make progress in your training if you don't do what we're about to show you and what we're about to tell you today in your training. And this is nothing sexy. This is not a hack. This is something that is really simple training theory that I think a lot of people miss out on, because in the concept of training, there's two things that you need in order to make progress in your ultramarathon training. And this goes for whether you're training for 50K, 50 miler, 100K, 100 miler, 200 miler. This is all an important principle to keep in mind when you are training. So there's two things that you need when you are training for an ultramarathon in order to make progress from a fitness standpoint. The first thing is stress. Now, I'm not talking about, life stress and mental stress. I'm talking about physiological stress, and that is training, right? That's why we log the miles. That's why we do the workouts. That's why we do the long runs, because what we're doing is we're putting physiological stress onto our body. And when we are out there running, what we're actually doing is we are breaking down the body. We're breaking down the muscle fibers. We're breaking down our aerobic system. And what we're actually doing is we're putting stress on the system, on our aerobic system, on our muscles to essentially break it down. And what is happening, the reason why training works is because when things break down, it sends a signal to our body telling us, hey, if we don't keep up with this stress that's coming onto us, if we don't keep up with the miles, if we don't keep up with this, then Joe or you, our body's thinking, we're gonna die out here. So what our body needs to do, it needs to adapt. It needs to get better, right? That's why we call it training adaptations, because our body needs to adapt to the training load that's coming in so that it can be better, so that it can essentially survive. That's why we do the training, because we're pushing our body to the point where it's breaking down so much and it needs to adapt to get stronger, to get better, to essentially survive, and you get faster, fitter, stronger, all those things as well too, right? So if you're out there logging, 70, 80 miles a week, and previously before maybe you logged 50 to 60 miles a week, you're breaking down your body even more to the point where your body's like, oh well, in order to handle this higher load, we need to get stronger so that this person, whether it's you, Joe, anyone, can get better and handle that load longer, so therefore you get stronger. So when you take all those adaptations into the race that you were training for, you are in there in the strongest place possible. Now, that's pretty obvious, right, in terms of the training standpoint, right? We need to train. But here's the thing, right? I mentioned one part of the puzzle is the stress. There's another part of the puzzle that people tend to forget, and it's not sexy, it's not flashy, but it is probably the most important thing to incorporate. And if you don't put this in your training block, you can essentially not see any of those beautiful gains that we were just talking about. And that second part of the equation here is rest. Now, I don't mean rest in terms of rest days or recovery or getting in mobility. I'm talking about specifically strategically inserted rest weeks in your training. Yes, weeks where you're actually pulling back. Now, there's a really important graph here, which, Christian, you can pull up. He's our amazing video editor. You can pull up right here over on this graph here that Tyler is conveniently making the space here for you. But when it comes to training, right, so we just talked about the stress, and you'll see on this graph that we build, and we put on the stress. But as we put on the stress, there is a dip in performance, and that makes sense. It's normal. We talked about this in the last video, where you have to get worse before you get better. And the reason for that is when you're putting the stress on the body, it actually takes about 2 to 6 weeks to see the full performance gains of that stress stimulus that you're putting in to actually come into effect. So if we think about that in terms of net performance, right? If you're going out there and you're putting increased stress on your body and you're not seeing the benefits, you're going to get worse, right? That's just a general thing. So it's normal when you're in a training block to see your paces and splits start to get worse and worse, right? If you think about the workouts that I've been doing over the series, my grade adjusted splits have been getting worse and worse because I'm putting in some adaptations. And quite frankly, if you are getting worse before you're getting better, that is kind of a sign that shows that you're on the right track with training. If you're just hitting PR after PR after PR, week after week after week after week, either A, you're very new to the sport and you're getting kind of the newbie gains that are into it, or B, you're not training hard enough. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind as a good reassurance for anyone. If you're you're hitting workouts for the third week in a row and you're oh my gosh, why is my pace getting slower? It's no, good. You are in a position where you are actually adding in, you got good stress and you're getting that performance decline. Now, within that performance decline though, as you can see here though, there's that little bump that leads to that performance later on, and that higher performance that you have. But the only way that that performance is able to get higher, the only way that you're about to really let those adaptations sink in, is if you take what I call a deload week. Now, a deload week is very simple. It is just a week that deloads you, or basically decreases the amount of volume and or the intensity that you've been doing in your training. From a volume perspective, what I usually like to see for deload weeks is you take your volume and you're going to cut it anywhere between 70 to 85% of your prior week. So you take your last week's volume, which is usually the highest one that you've done in the last couple weeks, and then you'll go ahead and basically take 70 to 85% of your volume in the deload week. Now, on top of that, what you can do is you can either reduce the intensity completely. So for example, like we had 2 VO2 max workouts in this block. This week, I'm just doing a couple days with some strides in there. Or you can add in, or you can decrease the amount of specific intense workouts that you have. So you can go to 1 VO2 max workout if that works for you. Now, to the degree that you cut your volume, to the degree that you cut your intensity is going to depend on a few different factors. First, it's going to depend on how you're feeling. If you're feeling way more beat up, tired, under-recovered, any of those things too, then you want to take your volume down to the lower side and you want to take your intensity down to the lower side of that scale. Conversely, if you're feeling really good, if you're feeling a lot peppier, or maybe you have a lot of experience putting on a lot of intensity or volume in general, you can go ahead and increase that to the higher end, so closer to that 85%, closer to that doing that 1 workout a week into that training structure that you have on there too. And it can also depend on the phase of training you're at. So for example, we're in the VO2 max phase. Most times in VO2 max phase, I might say, hey, if we're doing 2 of those workouts a week, which are very taxing both physiologically and neurologically and from a nervous system perspective, we might just want to be doing strides. And so if I take into the realms of me, if I looked at the end of last week, my runs were essentially, the pace was really getting whacked and slower, and I was feeling pretty tired. And so from that standpoint, I'm going to take volume down to about 80% of my last week's volume, and I'm actually going to take out all structured workouts. I'm just going to do easy runs with strides this week. So mostly easy aerobic volume, 2 sessions with strides this week, and that way I'm taking down that intensity. So what is actually happening here? Why is a deload week so important, and what's the thing that's happening in this phase? Well, the thing that's happening in this phase is being able to get into a position where you are letting those adaptations sink in, right? So this is a really good thing, and we're going to kind of talk about why that is on this run too. As I don't want to sit here and keep blabbing. We're going to get to running out here too, but I'll talk about why that is in our running that we're going to be getting into, and why the deload week works. And we're also going to talk about tips to enhance your deload week, things to do better, tips to really prioritize all the adaptations. So this is not about getting the most rest and recovery. This is about becoming a better runner. This is about becoming someone who's actually going to make better progress in their fitness. Because if you do this, right, and again, we're not like trying to compete. Maybe you are trying to compete against people, but if you're going to take one athlete who's just going to be building every week until the race, and you have another athlete that's doing build, deload, build, deload, that deloaded person is going to be able to reap the benefits of those adaptations. We're going to tell you how to maximize those today on the run here. So today's workout is very simple. Just 1 hour and 40 minutes, super easy, like nothing to it, conversational pace. And we're gonna show it's a conversational pace because I'm gonna be talking the entire time out here. But throughout the run, right, you're gonna see me running, and we're gonna talk about how to maximize your deload week, how to get the most out of it so that you can not only be recovered better, but you can make the most progress in your training. So let's get out, let's get after it. Hey, real quick, if you're training your butt off for your next ultra marathon and you're not seeing results or hitting a plateau, we would love to help you crush your goals and help you make new progress in your training through our Everyday Ultra coaching services. So if you want to work with us, you can book a free consultation call to see if we'd be a good fit, because we want to help you make progress in your ultra training, even if you're hitting a plateau, to hit new heights. So book a call at theeverydayultra.com or in the link below, and we'd love to chat with you. All right, back to the video. All right, we're out here for 1 hour and 40 minutes, super easy run, conversational pace, as you can tell by me being able to talk on here. So we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get in the adaptations we want to be the best endurance athlete that we can be. Now here's the thing, if you keep breaking down your body over and over and over and over again, you're gonna keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And I think the question here is, well, when do I get better? Right, all the time when I'm working with athletes and we see maybe a 3-week stretch, or let's even take my own specific training into account. So I've been building for several weeks, as I kind of build back volume from Tahoe 200, and as I build in this block for the 100-mile training for Kodiak. If you look at my last few long runs that I've done, the pace is getting a little bit slower and slower and slower. And if you look at the splits in my workouts, the splits are getting a little slower and slower and slower. And so am I getting worse? Well, yeah, but that's the point. On a micro scale, you actually do want to get a little bit worse before you get better, because it's showing some breakdown in the body. You need to have a time where you're pulling back a little bit in training so that your body can actually materialize the adaptations that we've been putting on, or the stimulus that we've been putting in the body, so that your body can make those adaptations to get better. It's one of the most important concepts when it comes to training, is that the gains are not made in the training that you're doing. It's not made in the stress. It's not made in the miles that you're putting in. The gains are actually made in the rest and the recovery process. Because when you take a deload week, when you take a rest, your body is actually making those adaptations that we're trying to set in there. So when we're out there breaking down our body through the miles, through the workouts, through the long runs, we're actually destroying our body a bit. And when we rest and recover, we do things like a deload week. We're actually making the improvements that are gonna make us fitter, stronger, everything as such. So it's in those recovery moments where we actually get better and stronger. So the reason why we take a deload week, it's not just to recover, it's to let the adaptations sink in. So one thing to kind of keep in mind all the time is when you're hitting the point where you're feeling really, really tired in training, that might be a signal that you need a deload week. And we're kind of going to talk about where are the points in your training where you can put in a deload week or should put in a deload week. So let's look into the context of my own training. So I had about 3 weeks from Tahoe where I was kind of building back volume, building back intensity, building back mileage. So just kind of having these build periods. And then I had 3 weeks of pretty hard training, right? So 3 weeks of adding in 2 VO2 max workouts a week, building up volume, then getting to the point where I was laying on the training pretty well. Now, as you can see from my last 2 long runs, and even my last couple workouts, the splits were starting to get a little bit slower. That's a normal thing, and that's a good thing, because it shows that all the training that I'm putting in is stressing out the body. As we see our performance start to decline, that is usually some time for a deload week, or signals that show that we are ready to deload the body. Now, there's kind of some general rules that we have when it comes to inserting deload weeks. And then there's some, okay, here are some signals that imply that we're ready for a deload week. And I'll start with the general rules first. So the general rules is usually when it comes to about 3 weeks in, when you come into a build phase, that's going to be starting to get a signal that, okay, now we need to look out for the signs of a deload week. A lot of times when it comes to training, people have a standard philosophy where it comes to build 3 weeks, pull back 1. But I don't think that is always the case, because if you're still seeing performance gains and you're still, feeling pretty good, you can build on for another week. That's why my training cycle, I kind of have built up for about 6 weeks or so before I've taken a deload. And the reason for that is because I was feeling good, feeling fit, and so we might as well keep reaping the benefits of performance as we're building on into this phase here. So don't take a deload week if you don't necessarily have to. Now I will say, the longest you can go before taking a deload week, or should go I should say, is about 6 weeks. I don't like to progress myself or an athlete past 6 weeks of building, because you don't want to drive your body in too deep. And when it comes to the risk reward benefits, 6 weeks is kind of the time frame I'll drag something out. Now 3 weeks is usually a good minimum kind of timeline, and most people, I will say, I will deload around that 3 week, 4 week phase, so that we can at least have a little bit of risk reward balancing so that we're not, pushing too deep when it comes to making a calculated assessment in terms of when we're kind of pulling them back. So 3 weeks is the baseline, 6 weeks is kind of the maximum. Now, what are the signs that show that you are ready for a deload? Well, a few different things. I already mentioned one. If you see your pace is significantly slowing down, and this is something where, if I'm looking at an athlete and I'm programming their workouts and I see their splits start to slow down from week to week on a pretty significant basis, probably shows that we're getting ready for a deload week. Especially if you're, 3 weeks into a build, if you compare your paces in those last kind of 3 workouts compared to where your paces have been earlier, and they're significantly slower, then it probably shows that you need to have a deload weekend because it shows your body's getting tired. That's sign number 1 for a deload week. 2, a little bit more of a subjective metric, but you want to monitor how you're feeling. So for example, this past week, I felt pretty tired in training. The last couple weeks, I felt pretty tired as well too. That's a pretty good metric to look at because especially when you're doing something really intense like speed workouts like we're documenting in this training, your body can feel more tired. From a nervous system standpoint, you could be putting in a lot of stress onto the body where you'll feel a little bit more sluggish. Maybe you're feeling a little bit more tired throughout the day, even though you're getting good sleep. That's usually some signs that the body's saying, hey, we need some recovery time. So from a subjective standpoint, if you're feeling a little bit more tired, you're feeling a little bit more beat up, that's a big thing to look out too. And that's like a day-to-day standpoint, but maybe point number 2A on here, or 2B I should say, is if you feel a little bit more sluggish in your runs and your workouts. Right, in your long runs, you're feeling like, hey, I'm not feeling as poppy, I'm not feeling as spry, I'm not feeling as jolted up as I was. Or maybe in the workouts, you're just feeling a little bit flat. That's one sign for deload week that you're getting on there. Another kind of signs to look out for is if you start to get to the point where maybe your sleep's getting a little bit more, spotty, maybe you're just feeling a little bit more tired throughout the day. It's another sign to look out for as well too. And generally, those are some big signs that say, hey, it's time to deload onto here too. So if you're seeing those signs all kind of come together, you've been building for at least 3 weeks, you're feeling a little bit more flat in your workouts, you're seeing performance decline, you're feeling a little bit more flat in day-to-day life, that means it is time to deload. And if you've never done deload week before, here's what I kind of always suggest for athletes to think about and kind of wait on so you can start to be a believer in it. And I'll tell you a story. So I used to be the person that was build all the time. No deload, no recovery. I was just all about slamming the miles. And man, when I would show up to the race, I would just be totally exhausted, totally whacked, and just feeling like I was stagnating in training all the time. And then when I learned about the concept of a deload week, I was pretty hesitant about it at first. I was like, I don't want to do this. What the heck? That makes no sense. Why would I take a lower week of training? What? I need to still be hitting it hard. But I always have a philosophy in life that if the science checks out with it, and you see a lot of successful people doing it, there's probably something about that thing. So I always like to be open-minded. So I said, you know what? I'm going to be open-minded and give it a try. And yes, although the anxiety was there the first time I took a deload week of seeing my Strava of all my friends out there crushing workouts, and I'm here doing less volume this week, keeping it easy. The stress is real. But then something magical happened the week after. I looked at my paces. My paces were faster. They were better. I felt so much more snappier on my workouts. I felt mentally better. I felt like I can push through low points a lot better. And that's when the realization came to me that there is something called deload magic. And it's a beautiful thing when you take these deload weeks and you can see the progress in your paces, in how you feel, in your durability. everything that we train, you can usually see those benchmarks after deload week. Because if you've done a deload week right, that week after, you're gonna probably see some sort of a gain, whether it's in your pace, whether it's in how your legs feel, whether it's how your energy levels are, or all of the above. You're probably gonna see a benefit on that. And I will tell you this, once you see that benefit, you're gonna be convinced. You're gonna be a believer. You're gonna be like, oh, this works. Because a lot of the reasons why we can be skeptical on certain things is because we haven't seen the benefit. But once we've seen the benefit, then we're sold. So all I say is give it a try if you haven't before. Trust the process, as cheesy and cliche as that sounded. But once you see that defining moment, once you see that performance increase, once you feel better, and once you see that your training is going to get better through that, you're gonna be convinced and hooked. So give it 1 week, that's all I'm saying. Give it 1 week try, and you'll be convinced. So anyways, that's the big thing if you're worried about getting less volume. I'm feeling a little bit beat up over the week, so I'm actually going to deload pretty significantly in terms of intensity. I don't think I'm actually gonna do any structured workouts this week. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do 2 easy runs at the end with some strides. Today, we're just keeping it chill easy, no strides. Yesterday I took a rest day, which normally I don't take, which that's not to say don't take your rest days. I've been doing this for years and years and years, but usually in deload week, I'll take a rest day to just like rest, recover, catch up on sleep. But because of all these things and how I've been feeling, I think I'm just gonna take it a couple easy runs with some strides, and the rest is just gonna be nice, easy aerobic volume. If I was feeling a little bit better, I'm probably just keeping 1 VO2 max session in the week. So that's it. That's how you deload. And all you really need to keep it is just 1 week. Now, here are some tips to get the most adaptations out of your deload week. So if you want to come back from your deload week and make the most progress, and again, this isn't about recovering better. I mean, on the surface it is, but if you look deeper, we want to recover better to make more progress. And, I'm just going to say this, I think it's funny. Whenever we put a piece of content out that's about recovery, it does not perform as well as like, here's this flashy workout where, I'm going to obliterate myself. That content always performs better. And I get it. Recovery isn't sexy. Like, recovery is boring. Trust me, I hate doing mobility. Like, it sucks. I don't like it. But guess what? This should be sexy because it allows us to perform better. We want to learn things because it makes us perform better. It makes us faster, it makes us stronger. And this right here is the thing, right? It's not that supplement. It's not that, flashy new tool. Yes, you have like the sexy workouts, but you can have the sexy workouts and not have the deload week. And if you don't have that, like, the workout's not gonna matter. So like, this is what we should be hyped about. And if you're watching this late, you're hyped about this, and you're gonna crush your ultra. Yes, you. I'm talking to you through that camera right now. That is a good sign for you, my friend. So, anyways, a little bit of a rant there. Sometimes I just babble, you can't always tell. Poor Tyler's just tracking me around the desert on a 1-wheel. Listen to me rambling about why people should be stoked about deload weeks. Anyways, so here's some tips to maximize performance after your deload week. How do you like them apples? First thing is this. When you're in a deload week and you're making decisions on what you're gonna do throughout the given week, first tip number 1 is remember the intention and let the intention be your guide. So let's talk about the intention. The intention of a deload week is to rest and recover and make your body ready to get back to the hard training sessions and let the adaptations sink in. So here's an example of making that kind of decision. Let's just say you have a decision and you're looking at, what you could potentially do on the Wednesday of a deload week. You can maybe do an intense workout, or you can, go ahead and maybe run easy with some strides. And the thing that I will say is, like, if you're feeling really good and you're feeling like you can go for it, like, yeah, great. If you're feeling pretty beat up and the answer's clear, and it's like, yeah, I should do easy run strides with easy runs and strides, but we've all been in the gray area, right? Where it's like, you know, I feel okay. I could do this workout. Or, you know, I feel like I could do the easy runs and strides, but I feel like I might, you know, benefit from something a little bit more. Well, as ultra athletes, what do we usually opt for? The more, right? Like if we see a path in the road and it says difficult or easy, we're taking that right way. But remember the intention, my friends. The deload is meant to recover, and it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you not tough. It makes you smart. But my whole thing with an athlete, if I'm working with them, or even myself, if I find myself on the fence of choosing to go harder or go easier in a deload week because I'm unsure about where the body feels, always opt for the thing that's going to promote the most recovery. So in this standpoint, with this conflicted person that we're hypothetically creating in this scenario, we would have them do easy run with strides, because the deload week is not the time to add fitness. The deload week is not the time to crush the body. The deload week is time to rest and recover. So make the decisions that optimize that. That's number one. The second thing to really optimize your deload week is you're probably going to be spending less time running. And when you're spending less time running, you are probably going to have a little bit more free time in the day. So two things that I suggest to you is, number one, if possible, substitute that extra running time that you don't have with sleep. Again, recovery is the paramount thing, and sleep is one of the best things that you can do for recovery. So, for example, for all this week, on the runs where I'm normally waking up at the butt crack of dawn to beat this Phoenix heat, like I'm actually gonna sleep in a little bit, and then I'll probably just go on the treadmill and you know, just totally just enjoy the sleep and let that sleep recover me even more. Because when you get more sleep during the deload week, you want to be in a position where, you know, you are letting those adaptations that you've been making sink in even more. So something to keep in mind with that is substitute the extra time with sleep. Or here's the other thing: when we're training for an ultra marathon, life can be busy, right? There can be things that are put on the back burner. We might need to prioritize ultra running over some other stuff. The second thing you can do is something I can call rebalancing. So maybe you're good on sleep, maybe you don't need more of it, which, man, if that's you, good on you, because I know a lot of us aren't getting enough sleep. But all that being said, you can also use the extra time to rebalance. So maybe is there extra time that you want to spend with your partner or your kids or your family? Maybe there's a project that you've been super stoked about that you've always wanted to dive a little bit more in. Make the time for that. Maybe there's a hobby you wanted to try that running has consumed all that free time, and now you got a little bit more this week, and so add it on to that. So rebalance is a good thing too, because mentally that'll allow you to be less stressed, feel a little bit more comfortable about the running, and something that I think is really good. I know for me, when I get to deload weeks, I always like to do a little bit more creative work inside of Everyday Ultra, right? Like kind of be, you know, more strategic with some of the pieces that we have and all that kind of stuff too. So on top of all the sleep, so something to kind of keep in mind to also balance, because, you know, mentally that will help. And I think a deload week is not just about the physical rest, but it's also about the mental rest, because you need to reset your central nervous system, you need to reset your mind, you need to reset all these things that are going to help you get back to the training stronger. The third thing is kind of a little bit of a dichotomy to the first thing that I mentioned, but still very important, is even though it's a deload, that doesn't mean don't run at all. So yes, if you need to take an extra rest day, take it. Yeah, if you need to cut volume a little bit lower, do that. But a deload week is not a full rest week. And you do need to continue to run. You do need to continue to keep your muscles activated. And sometimes I see the pendulum swing in the complete other direction where athletes are like, well, maybe I'm just gonna run 2 times this week after I've been running 5. I would not do that, because you still need to maintain at least a little bit of something when it comes to maintaining your fitness. So yeah, be in a position where, take the extra rest if you need it, but don't completely see the whole week as rest, which I'm sure is music to a lot of y'all's ears if you're someone who struggles with doing a little bit less. But I will say, when it comes to deload week and rest, it's interesting because I struggle even saying this out loud, but it's kind of true, is, more is not always better, because you need to balance out the scales. Just like, with stress and rest, like we talked about, if you have too much stress relative to rest, you're not gonna make progress. Conversely, if you have too much rest relative to stress, yeah, you're also not gonna make progress. So you kind of need to balance those things out, and make sure that you're still getting some sort of maintenance work during the deload week and not just completely nailing it in. I think the last thing that I will say is try out many different styles of deload weeks and see what you respond better to at, and track your progress along the way. I think it's really good, to track your training and, see your paces, see your fitness, not even just like the hard numbers, but also subjective data. That's why I'm a really, really big proponent of keeping a workout log, not just of all your data and splits, which usually is tracked onto an app if you're using a watch, but keeping a journal that says, hey, today felt great, today didn't feel so good, today I felt strong, today I felt flat, because that subjective data matters too. If you're running the same pace, and let's just say you feel way better running that same pace than you did 4 months ago, and you felt like you could keep that pace up for longer periods of time, from an objective data standpoint, it might look like you're not making progress. But if you add in that subjective data, you're making loads of progress. Like, that's freaking huge. So my point is this: when you're tracking all those things and you experiment with different types of deload weeks, taking on a little less volume, taking on a little more volume, taking on a little less intensity, see where your biggest performance increases come from, and you might find a deload strategy that works best for you. For years I tried a deload strategy where I kept, 2 intense sessions a week, and that just wasn't working for me. Then I switched to either doing 1 intense session or no intense session with just in strides, and I found that my performance was increasing way more because of that. So, because of that, and knowing to see how my body responds, now that's a form of deload weeks that I tend to get into a lot more. So track the data, experiment around, and see what works best. And you'll maybe find the deload week flavor that works best for you. The gains are made in the recovery. So with that, take the deload week as a time to be better, be stronger. Knowing that you're resting to be stronger is a beautiful thought. And I think that leads to the most mature ultra runner. I think a mature ultra runner is one where we can realize that it's not always about, hammering more miles constantly. It's about knowing when our body needs to pull back to not only recover, but to be stronger and better on race day. And you do that, you're gonna find your performance is gonna increase greatly. So, I'm a big deload week guy here. We're enjoying this deload as much as possible. All right, well, that does it for today's run. Here are the stats. It's put up together by Christian. Shout out to Tyler filming. And yes, so we're gonna take a deload week here. And then the next week, we're gonna move into a new phase of training called the lactate threshold phase. What does that mean? Stay tuned. Here for another great week of 100-mile training for Kodiak. And we'll be back stronger after the deload, baby. So deload strong, deload with all the trust that you're gonna get better. Don't be afraid to take that rest. See you in the next video.